Excuse me. You're not ready. I'm ready when you are. Okay, chapter 3 of Ecclesiastes. We had a problem on Sunday morning with our transmission of it, so we're going to kind of do a review and there's so much that I could preach 2 messages on what I preached on Sunday morning, or what we taught on Sunday morning. So we're looking at this, and we'll begin, of course, chapter 3. We had that beautiful passage that's been quoted even by secularists, or even a guy named Pete Seeger, who was more of an atheist than anything, but he had a great influence on a lot of folk singers. He was born in 1919, but the 60s, the folk singers really picked up on a lot of his songs, whether it's If I Had a Hammer, or I'd Hammer in the Morning, and all these different songs that Peter, Paul, and Mary and others sang. And that was my growing up time. And so a lot of the things that we've talked about with Solomon, whether it's a Song of Solomon or Ecclesiastes, it really, when I read it again, it puts me back and it'll remind me of something, some teaching or some song that I was influenced by. And so we see that we are talking about under the sun, in the world, where we've been. And so we begin now, we see that he says a time to be born, there's a time and purpose under heaven. And of course, that was even a song that hit number 1 back when I was a teenager. But of course, it wasn't about a time and purpose under heaven, it was God's purposes. But if we just all take care of one another and not have any more war and so forth, then I swear it's not too late, and that type of thing. Well, we're going to solve the world's problems. Well, that would be Pete Seeger's idea, as well as secular human, is that we can take care of our problems. And so, but we see that the cynic that we have, and it really gets deep in chapter 3, the last part of chapter 3, and chapter 4. Now, as Solomon gets to the point where he says, it would have been better if I'd never even been born. When you really look at the world, think about this. If there is no God, then, and if there's no hope of heaven, and remember, Paul wrote to the Thessalonians. He said, "I'm writing to you as opposed to those who have no hope." That's a real strong, no hope, no expectation of anything in the future. And that's really what secularism and what humanism, what narcissism, the different terms that we use, that we've talked about, existentialism, it's all up here in their head, and it's what happens after we vaporize, we're gone. And so reality is what we have in our heads, and we see that that's true with Nietzsche, who said God is dead, we don't need him anymore, we killed him. The idea and his whole idea of God was that. And actually, the idea is truth is what we make it. So we've got to decide what is truth. And it's within us. And if we get everybody to think the way we do, then that's truth. And basically, that's, communism and all the rest. If we can get everybody thinking alike, then there'll be a classless society. There will be utopia. There will be heaven on earth, whatever. But then you die. But if there is no hope, then this is, and it doesn't matter how bad this world gets, and this is what Solomon is saying, this is the best life you'll ever have. But if there is hope, no matter how bad it gets, there's always something better. And it's the worst thing you'll ever go through, is here on earth. And so I like to say, cheer up, things are going to get better. Because there's a hope. There's a hope for the believer. And so as we look at this, and this is one of the great passages that Solomon gives us some great worldly wisdom, and yet he gives us some tremendous despair. And it's really hard to change gears from verse 16 of chapter 3 through the end of chapter 4, which is verse 16. There's a lot here and a lot of negativism. And then he puts some truism in there. And so we begin first in chapter 3, And we'll begin reading in verse 16. Okay, after he talks about the time for this, but that God is going to require an account of everything that's past. And we talked about time and how that time is irretrievable, but it is going to be judged, what we do with our time. But then in verse 16, moreover, okay, now he's changing gears. Moreover, I saw under the sun. Remember the limitless, we're limited by time, space, and systems. God is a God of time and systems, timing and systems, as far as our creation is. So he's more than that. But he has created, the creation is made from timing and systems, whether it's the multiple systems and systems within the systems that you have within your body, and every cell is a system, or the universe system, cosmos. They're all, or logos, which is a system of thought. Cosmos is universe, whatever. Even philosophers realize that there's systems out there. And Solomon is saying, under the sun, we are bound by time and systems and circumstances, just in space. I mean, as far as what we can do. He says, okay, God's going to judge. But now he says, I'm the king, and I've done, boy, look what I've done. I'm the world's wisest man, as far as famous. God has given me tremendous riches, and I've explored all these things. God's given him a wonderful mind. But now he looks objectively at people. And in verse 1, or verse 16, he says, in the place of judgment, wickedness was there. As great as my kingdom is, people are still people. And even judges have problems. Boy, do we see judges having problems today? My, they're breaking the law because in their minds, they are truth. It doesn't matter what the law, what even's written down, whether it's in the Bible or in the Constitution or whatever, what they believe is true is true. And so we see that in the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of righteousness, iniquity, twisted thinking was there. Iniquity is get from the root of twisted or twisted thinking. So transgressions are actions, iniquities are thinking. You're twisted in your thinking. He says there's a lot of people out there that are twisted in their thinking. And of course, Nietzsche said, God is dead, we killed him. And so God is whoever we feel like he is. Now Nietzsche came up in the late 1800s. All kinds of things were happening in the late 1800s. Darwin had come out with his origin of the species. And that really got people thinking about if there's no God, then what can we do? And what is truth? And truth comes from us. And so Nietzsche and others, we talked about how that the beginnings of existentialism, whatever is real, is we've got to decide what is real in our minds. And then it was Christianized by a guy named Kierkegaard. He was Swedish or Danish, I forget which, but he's a Scandinavian. But he came along and he made it into, okay, there's a leap of faith. There is a God out there, but really the Bible is in our guideline because we've got to decide who God is. Well, if we don't have an anchor, we must believe that he is and that he's a rewarder of those who diligently seek him, but we find who he is through his revelation. And Kierkegaard and liberal theology that really took off on that in the 20th century was, the Bible really isn't that important because, we believe in Christ, but he's who we got to decide what's true in the Bible, what isn't. But God says all scripture is given by the inspiration of God. And so we see all the system of thoughts that is going on. I really I ran across a quote from Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington was one of the original civil rights guys back in the late 1800s and early 1900s. He was a black educator. And he had profound impact on a lot of the a lot of the changing of the attitudes of people, even in racism. Especially, you wanted to educate the black man and so forth. But boy, if we'd had him 100 years later, or even in the 60s, as the civil rights leader, it would have been a whole lot different than it is today. But I like what he said. He said, a lie doesn't become truth, and wrong doesn't become right, and evil doesn't become good just because it is accepted by the majority. I like that. He says, a lie doesn't become truth, and the truth doesn't become a lie. A lie doesn't become truth, and wrong doesn't become right. Now, he's saying there are definite rights, and there's definitely wrongs. And the world is saying, no, we decide what's right and what's wrong, because we got to think it out. Modern man. He says, wrong doesn't become right, and evil doesn't become good just because it is accepted by the majority. Now, this whole thing that we're hearing today about democracy is the idea that the majority rules. This country is not a democracy. A democracy is mob rule. This country is a republic. It's republics within a republic. What we mean by that, yeah, there's a federal government, but they are connected, but each state has its own laws. And then each city, most cities have their own regulations within the republic. And so we are Republican as far as, now, not the party, but and we pledge allegiance to the flag for which and the republic for which it stands. Not a democracy. But what we're hearing so much about, these people are against democracy. No, they realize that if they get mob rule, if they get the courts, if they get the populace going in one direction, they can destroy the opposition. And that's what they want to do. If they can get all three, especially the courts these days. And this one knows he starts off with, I looked at the courts, and they're corrupt. When man gets away from right from wrong, as far as what God says, and it doesn't, there again, what is truth? And we're going to look at that in a moment. So he says, first of all, then I see that there's a lot of problems. In verse 12, he says, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked. So notice he comes back. This is what makes it so difficult, because he's thinking in the secular mind, but then he backs up and says, but there's a God in heaven. So it's really difficult to follow his line of thinking, because he wants to think, or he's thinking like an unsaved secular person where there's no God, because after all, he's tried to go that route, but then he keeps coming back to it. But then we see the progression in verse 18. He says, I saw in my heart concerning conditions of the sons of men. God tests, remember? He tested God back in chapter 2. But notice he comes around and says, no, God tests men. And again, folks, it's not, you can do with God what you want to, but the end result, what really matters, is what God does with you. It's your opinion. You can have any opinion you want to. And you can accept or reject God, but the key is whether he accepts you. And so this whole idea, I'll make God up the way I want to. In fact, I heard a quote from somebody. They were asking a question. What would you do if you met the Lord, and you died and you met the Lord, and he said, why should I let you into heaven? And the man answered, he said, well, I don't really believe in you, therefore you have no authority over me. Now that is arrogant. There again, the God of heaven, who made him, and yet because God became, and that's what humanism is, the worship of the mind. My mind says there's no God. And if my mind says that I want to be something that I'm not, then who are you to tell me I can't be? In fact, I'm going to demand that you do accept me for what I say I am. Therefore, I am no longer a male or female or whatever. And see how far, this is where it's gone. It's gone to this depth of depravity. And so he is saying, I said concerning the conditions of men. Notice he says, God tests them, that they may see that they themselves are like animals. You go to the average public college or just where a bunch of girls and guys are together in some type of organization, especially dorms or whatever. I mean, if there's no rules, then, I mean, I've talked to guys and girls in these dorms, and I mean, they have to leave because of just the way that you're afraid to walk into your own room because you don't know who's going to be in there and what they're doing. And we can go into that, but I think you understand where I'm coming from. But what's the difference between that and a dog kennel? Really? And that's what he is saying here. He is saying we're like animals. He says, for what happens to the sons of men happens to animals. One thing befalls them and one dies, and so dies the other. So if we're going to live like animals, we're going to die like dogs. If we're going to live like dogs, we'll die like dogs. Dog eat dog. He says, surely they have one breath. A man has no advantage over the animals for all his vanity. Now, this is, again, we know that there's a difference, but he's back into a secular mind. We know that that's false. Does man have advantage over animals? Yes, God breathed into man the spirit of life. And as we mentioned, I haven't had anybody takers yet, but I had a farmer tell me that when you look at cattle or whatever in the wintertime, and you'll see that their breath and the vapor of their breath kind of stays where it is or even sinks. Whereas you look at the human and their breath goes up. And so I don't know, I have not confirmed that, but if you can help me confirm that, that'd be great. But the whole idea of the spirit there can be translated pneumonia, which is wind or whatever, or breath. And so he says the breath of an animal which goes down to the earth. Now, he concludes this, so I perceived. Okay, so now he's coming to the point. A bunch of people judges, then people that judge themselves, and don't judge me, we turn into animals. No judgment zone. And so what happens? I want to live like I want to, and if that means I live like a dog, so what? And so he says, or whatever animal you want us to put in there. I don't want to denigrate dogs, but you know what, you understand what I'm saying. So he said, so I perceive that nothing is better than the man should rejoice in his own works. Just stay to yourself. I notice he says, this is where I get now, he's got to contradict that in the next chapter. But just stick to yourself, keep to yourself, and because you're not going to, people are like dogs, and he says, for that is the heritage of what my heritage is. For who can bring him to see what will happen after him? So you don't know what's going to happen. Que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. I'm going to retract into my own little world, a world of my own that no one else can share. No, there's something out there, and he's going to come to that. He's going to come to some human realizations and realities in the next chapter. But so he ends with that. He begins with. I see all this, and so the best defense I can have is to put a little fence around me. I am a rock, I am an island. But then it's very interesting. Again, those are people that I grew up listening or hearing or whatever, and had influence on my generation. But Paul Simon was a very sensitive man. And so even though he's talking about being a rock and an island, at the very end of the song, he says, and a rock feels no pain, and an island never cries. But I'm a rock. No, what is he saying? It's just like these signs that I see out there on the bumper stickers where it says never fear or no fear. That means they're trying to overcome fear. I mean, this no fear is the idea I'm going to disregard fear, but so that means I'm going to have to do something to psych myself out. And so an island, a rock has no pain. He had a lot of pain. In fact, I've read, because of this, I've gone back and looked at some of his biography. He's a very brilliant man. He's a Jew. But he's a very sensitive and very talented man. He could put thoughts, especially very sensitive and negative, hurtful thoughts, into writing. A lot of us, a sound of silence and all that. But at the same time, he ends, his songs with no hope. This is the way it is. And so, and that's the way the world is. I mean, all the songs, where have all the flowers gone, a long time passing, and there's no answer. I mean, where have all the young girls gone? They married everyone, or whatever the idea is. All the girls have gone into the bondage of marriage. And really, communism is back as far as the 1920s. And I've read books like from Whittaker Chambers and others where they were in it in Columbia University back when, if you were a communist in Columbia University at the time, you better hide because you'd be kicked out. Now it's the other way around. If you're not a communist, you'll be kicked out. But one of the things that he said was they promoted no marriage, and they would live with each other even back then. And that was one of the tenets of communism. Now, we hear all these things, that different people, anti-communists put out, they're right-wing fanatics or whatever. But no, these are coming from the people that were there. And so I like to read them more. I like Whittaker Chambers and others. But, and by the way, he became an editor of Time magazine. And I think I've told you a little bit about him. He's a fascinating study. But he became very conservative, rejected the Communist Party. By the way, today, another man who rejected the secular world and really became very influential, he died yesterday. His name was Alan Dershowitz. And he was one of the flaming liberals back there. Again, in my generation, he's up in his 80s now, so he's older than me. And he became one of the leading conservatives and thoughts and everything, and very profound books that he wrote in the 80s or in the turn of the century and so forth. And he died yesterday up in his 80s. But at the very end of his, I read a little blurb. I didn't read it all, but I wish I'd had time. But he just, thoughts on death. And it's very profound. He realized that there's reality out there, and then there's skepticism and all the rest. But he saw the light in a lot of areas. I'm not sure he ever became a Christian. He was a Jew again, but a great man. So here Solomon is at the end of his, here at the end of his thoughts here, saying, with all these things going on, and people acting like animals, the best thing you can do is kind of put a protective wall around you and become that rock or that island. And yet the Lord says, no man lives unto himself, and no man dies unto himself. God has made us social animals, if you want to call it that, although I've been rebuked by, well, not rebuked, but we are not animals. No, we're not. I mean, we are above the animals, but you understand where we are. So that's the end of that thought. Now he says, I'm going to change the gears again. Then I returned and considered. Okay, let's carry this on a little bit farther. All those judges and all those people out there that live in the no judgment zones, all these people, they're twisted, they got problems, and they live like animals. And the best thing you do in a world like that is just to withdraw and keep your thoughts to yourself and do the best you can and live life the best you can. But now he says, then I returned and considered, okay, now he's going to look at the marketplace. And we see that, and he says, and so he said that done under the sun, there again, he's looking at under the normal life without God. He says, and look, tears of the oppressed. And this is where we get into this oppression that I have heard all my life. How that, and most of the time it's coming from rich people or people that have very privileged lives, that they've had all the money they've wanted. They've grown up in the greatest prosperity the world has ever known. They've had free education. But now they're saying, I see the oppression, and we've got the tools to fix it because we're the smart ones. We're the elite. And we're the brain trust. And what have we had? We have taken on the idea that the Ivy League and the state universities have all the answers. And after all, I listened to it all my life. Education is the answer. Education? Well, it depends on how what you've learned or who's teaching you. But no education, we'll take care of it. And well, what does that mean? Just leave it to us and just keep your mind out of it. Just send us the money and we'll educate your kids. Isn't that what we're seeing today? You have no right to tell us how to teach your kids. And there's Supreme Court cases up there right now dealing with that kind of thing. So education belongs to us because we're the elite. We're the people who know. And so now he comes along and he says, I looked and he says, I saw the tears of the oppressed. So he's looking at, as a wealthy man, at the oppressed people. He says, and they have no comforter. So I'm going to be the one who helps them. Like a bridge over troubled water. I will lay me down. So I'm going to help you. And so he says, they're oppressed, but they have no comforter. But notice what he says. On the side of the oppressors, there's power. But they have no comforter. So you have the oppressed who have no comforter. And is it a real blessing to be the person who wins? And so we see there's losers or weepers, and winners have power, but all of them have no comforter. What's the best, let's just say that, let's don't call it oppressed, but that you become successful. And all of a sudden you become the wealthiest person in your family or in the church. What happens? You lose your friends because they're either envious of you or whatever. I mean, isn't it interesting? He says, so I became very powerful, but it became very lonely at the top because I'm up there and I've lost a lot of friends because they can't identify with me. And then a lot of other people that I thought were friends envy me. So what can I do? So everybody's oppressed. And so he says, therefore I praise the dead. Notice this is where he gets low. He says, therefore I praise the dead who are already dead, more than the living who are still alive. Now that's down. That is fatalism. It's better to be dead. And there again, what do we hear today? We have all kinds, the liberal mind, the answer is death. What's the best way to take care of an unwanted child? Kill him. What's the best way to take care of older folks who can't take care of themselves? Kill them. Now we're having, assisted suicide. And look at all the songs that deal with death. And I don't want to go into all that. We don't have time. But just next time you listen to radio or or people that, that's the best you can offer is death. And he says, I've seen that. And he says, notice in verse 3, yea, better than both he who has never existed, who has not seen evil work that is done under the sun. It would be better that I never even lived. You ever hear that? That's depression. Better that I've never even lived. So that's hopelessness. That's suicidal. That whole, what is it? Suicide. That whole MASH song. That was I think the theme of MASH. The words to it are about suicide. And it became a very popular song or whatever. I think that's the one now. I might be, but there's one. What is it? It is. Okay. Okay. So some of this is from memory because I left some of my notes at home right now, but I think you're right. And so there again, suicide. And that was one of the most popular movies that was ever around back in the 70s. And then one of the longest running serial shows on television. And the whole theme of it is suicide. And so it's kind of interesting how that man's thoughts are that way. But then there's a way that seems right unto man, but the ends thereof are the ways of death. And so in verse 4, again, okay, changing thoughts again. I saw for all the toil and evil work a man is envied by his neighbor. So we talked about that. So you do all this work, you make a big paycheck, and then what does that do? And what's the whole politics of envy today? The rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and we got to tax the rich. Well, who's the rich? somebody who has a little bit more money than you do. Oh, no, it's the ones who are making $1 million. No, it's the person that you don't like, and they are the business owner, and you're the worker. Or look at that person. They've got that big, they had to cheat. And all this, the envy that we have, that people have. And we're taught that. Why should you have something? We live in a village. You didn't make that. You hear all those terms and all that. You didn't build that. Well, wait a minute. Somebody did. And should we not enjoy the reward of our labor? No, because you did it by slave labor, or you did it by being harsh to the worker. All these different terms that we hear today. And so we see it's a whole convoluted way of looking at things rather than being happy for someone. Do you praise the Lord when somebody's successful? Or do you thank God that, some friend of yours got ahead? Or do you say, Lord, why didn't you give me that? Look at that person. They got a brand new car. Lord, why were you so good to me? Or good to them and not to me? And people in churches do that. And so that's just man thinking as man. He says, but the fool, notice he says, verse 5, again, the fool folds his head, consumes his own flesh. Why should I work and slave away when you make all the money? The fool says, I'm not going to do anything. You look at all those fools on the street, and they're marching against everything. When do they ever work? How can they do that unless somebody's paying them to do what they're doing? They've got all this time on their hands, and one of the bad things is the people who are opposed to it, they can't do the same thing because they got to work. And so again, we see that the fool, depending on others. He says, then both hands are full together and they toil, and but it's all grasping for the wind. And then we see the next thing. So we see oppression in society and the marketplace and all the oppression and the inequality. And why do we have inequality? And then we see the oppression of loneliness, verses 9 through 12. Okay, let's go back to actually verse 8. But as we said back at the end of chapter 3, I'm going to be a rock, I'm going to be an island, I'm going to, an island feels no pain. No, a rock never feels no pain, an island never cries. So I want to be free from all that. But there's a problem. Because there is one alone without a companion. He has neither son nor brother, yet there is no end of his labors. So if you're single, don't you have to work? And you'll have to continue working because you're single. If you get married, you hope that you've made enough money single that you know how to make more. And that's why I was talking about a person we're praying for. I'm really counseling him. You've got to get on your own feet, and you've got to have the goal that not only can you support yourself, but that you can support someone else. Because that's true independence, is when you can start supporting others. But he says, nor is his eye satisfied with riches. So a lonely person has problems, and that money can't buy, or problems can't solve. He says, but he never asks, for whom am I toiling and deprive myself of good? This is all vanity and a grave of misfortune. Or grave misfortune. So he says, the single person. So they made a lot, but they die in loneliness. We talked about Howard Hughes and other people, Eleanor Rigby, and all these different songs that come out, all the lonely people. Where do they all come from? And that's loneliness. He's a nowhere man with his nowhere plans, and no one cares. He's nobody, whatever the song is. But it's all about nothing. Even Jerry Seinfeld says the whole thing is about what? Nothing. Empty humor. And so we can get into that. And it can be funny at times. Yes, it can be. But you're laughing yourself to death. But then he turns it around, and here he gives some worldly wisdom that even God made us social animals. He did not intend for us to live alone. One of the worst things you can do is put someone into solitary confinement, because God has made us social. No man lives to himself, no man dies to himself. He says the two are better than one. Verse 9. Because they have good reward for their labor. So they support one another. And those two is better than one. And so as a result, now you're helping each other. There's something about that. It's good that my wife and I are married for 45 years next month. And it's really been a help. But there again, but then I have a church. I've got people that care. It's good to have a friend or a godly business partner, or whatever. But he says, two are better than one because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, so notice now the different things that happens. If they fall, first of all, their reward for their labor, but also they have comfort. He says, if they fall, one shall lift his companion up, or they have support. They have reward for their labor together. They can work good together. They also can have each other's back, I guess is the best way to put it. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion, but woe to him that is alone when he falls. There again, we got one person that we help, and we were watching them like a hawk because they've got to have a friend. This is what friends are for, both literally as figuratively. And so we help each other up. He says, and again, if two lie down together, and now, of course, this is primarily marriage, but oh boy, look at this. He's advocating, lying down with anybody. No. Even in wartime, you put two soldiers out in the battlefield and it's 0 degrees out there, they might snuggle up to each other. In fact, I was talking to a man. I don't know, I wear my Navy hat around because I'll have all kinds of people walk up to me and talk from all ages. And they'll tell me what ship they were on or where they were in the Korean War or Vietnam War. And we just have a good time talking back. And I have been fascinated by some of the things that they've told me. But one man was telling me he was in the Chosun Reservoir, that was in Korea, where we overextended our lines up into close to China, and then the Chinese came in and really cut us off, and it was just a major miracle that we got out of there. But a lot of men froze to death coming back down from those mountains. And he says, I was there and I was on guard duty. And I was complaining about being on guard duty until I came back to the tent, and the man that I was in the tent with had frozen to death. I'm going, oh, and he's had to live with that now for the last 70 years. So I think some of those guys might have snuggled up to each other, don't you? If they had a dog out there, they'd have snuggled up to the dog. So that's what it's talking about. It's not talking about perversion. And so he said, again, if two lie down together, we're going to keep warm and so forth. And though they may be overpowered, so here you have comfort or warmth or whatever, but though they may be overpowered by another, two can withstand. So here you have protection. But then 3 cord is not quickly broken. So if you have a team, it's even better. And of course, we're not talking about marriage there, unless you're talking about God being the person. And of course, that many times that's been applied, especially by the Puritan writers and so forth. That's how they apply this. But whenever I deal with people, especially with their personal problems and their family problems that they can't control, I say the best thing you can do is get close to God. Now, what you hope is that that your spouse or whoever is wanting to get close to God too. If you do, then you're going to come together somewhere. Can two walk together unless they be agreed? But you want to make sure that you're with God, at least there's two of you. And you can't control the other person, but God can. And that's marriage counseling to me. You got to start off with, where are you now? And what are you doing for God? Now, unless, how can you even pray unless you've given your heart to God? And so we see again, and of course I got things in my family, loved ones that have had the horrors of all kinds of horrible things that have gone in their lives. My wife is talking to one of her family members that's got just problems it's not marital problem, it's something else, personal problem with two people, but there's no answer. And you can't control the person who hates you, but you can control the person you can be controlled by the person who loves you, and that's the Lord. And so when the man's ways when a man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. And so, Lord, I can't do anything about them, but I can do something about my relationship with you. And let God change the hearts. And so, again, is it going to be easy? No, but that's the only hope I have. Because there's certain problems out there that, what are you going to do, kill them? That's what the world says. Or let them die, or pray that they die, or whatever else. And yet John tells us, he says, there is a sin unto death, but we don't pray for it. Lord, kill that person. No, we as Christians are even prohibited from doing that. And so we see that he says a threefold cord is not easily broken. He says, better is, okay, now very quickly we have to close, but he says, verse 13 through 16, he says, better a poor and wise youth than an old foolish king. Who's the foolish king? Him. And so we're going to see, he's going to say this at the end. Do what I tell you, and don't do what I did. Basically, I've lived a life, and I'm old now, and boy, have I made myself into a fool. But he says, who will admonish, he says, there is an old man and foolish king who will be admonished no more. And you can't deal with an old man like me. He says, for he comes out of prison to be a king, although he is born poor in his kingdom. I say all the living who walk under the sun, they were with the second youth who stands in his place. He's saying, I saw there's no end. Generations are coming. And he says, okay, the next generation, and even if you come from nowhere, like my dad did, he was a shepherd, David, and he became king. But guess what? I replaced him. But guess who? Now I'm old. Somebody's going to replace me. That's one of the best. Reading this has just brought back so many things, because I look back on the way I thought as a kid or a young man. And now I look at the older people the way that they looked at me. I was thinking about a man, he and his wife, in my early ministry. I was 27, 28 years old, single, took a church. And he really helped me with a lot of the carpentry that had to be done around church. He was a master carpenter. But he would tell me about things, and to me at the time, big deal. Health problems that he had, big deal, we all. But now you get older and you start realizing, oh, that's what they meant. And no, they were going through a lot more problems than I even thought about. But it just boom right over my head, even as a loving pastor. I didn't understand it. But now I look back on it and say, what a fool I was. You feel like a fool. But I just have to say, Lord, I did the best with what I had, But please forgive me for not being a little bit more, or being, why should I not been more spiritual and more sensitive? And yet, but there again, in life, you can't go back and redo it. It's gone. And so he says, there was no need of all the people over him whom he made king. And so he's saying, notice all the people. All the people, boy, that's great, he's a king, but now he's going to be like me one day. I remember I was reading something about a man, and people were wondering about him, or his kids were wondering, because he went to, I think, his daughter's house. And she caught him going upstairs and turning on every light that he could find. And she said, "Dad, why are you doing that?" He said, "I just want to remember what it was when you were growing up as a little girl." And so, paying you back or whatever, And so it is in life. But he says, yet those who come afterwards will not rejoice. Okay, who thinks of Solomon today? Who thinks of George H.W. Bush? Who thinks of Ronald Reagan? Kids don't even know who we're talking about. Who? They did a study of those kids that went down to the Gulf Coast or whatever for college. And these are the college kids. And they would do these interviews. And they asked, one question was, who fought in the Revolutionary War? Who did we fight in the Revolutionary War? And these kids were saying, Mexico, Russia, and these are college kids. No wonder we're in trouble. When a nation, and that's one of the things that we're seeing today, if there's no heritage, there's no roots. And we could teach people what we want. And that's been the systematic goal of education. Kids don't know the price that was paid. And so he says, that's the way it's going to be. Yeah, those who come afterwards will not rejoice. Surely this is also vanity and grasping for the wind. The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. I don't know. I guess we've gone too long. But I like, what is truth? And I'm just going to share this with you. Erwin Lutzer is a very profound thinker. He was the pastor of Moody Bible Church for a while, a great writer. He's written some very thoughtful, but if you want a great message on truth, go to, it's Truth or Truthiness. And truthiness was a term that came out in a few years ago, Webster's Dictionary, or the dictionary that every year comes up with new words that are now accepted. But truthiness is a form of truth, but it doesn't have to be totally truth, but it's truth enough to get people by. And again, that's, as long as you vote on it, then whoever the majority is truth. Well, no, that's not the case. But I like what he said about 5 different things about truth, and we'll close. But he says, first of all, truth is in God. Truth begins with God. What is truth? Pilate asked. The Lord Jesus said, I am truth. Truth is reality. Truth is creation. Truth is there's somebody up there that designed us. Truth is 2 + 2 = 4. There's definite things about truth. So truth is in God. Truth is exclusive, meaning that it's either truth or error. And either it is truth or it's a lie. Well, your truth is different than my truth, and there's no real truth. Then, okay, I can say that you're a liar and everything you've told me is a lie. Because if there's no truth, that means you're a liar. No, that's not what, no. Well, see what we mean? Either it's truth or it's a lie. It's exclusive. That is why the Lord says, I am the way, the truth. Anything outside of him is a lie. Truth is reality. Truth is not only exclusive, but it's objective, which means that it is outside of your mind. Truth is truth, whether you believe it or not. Wait a minute, truth is what we believe together. Karma, brothers. Let's all get together and think together and have truth. No, every one of us can go and jump off the cliff and think we're going to fly, but what's going to happen to us all? We're going to die. So there again, truth is objective. Truth is exclusive. And then truth is offensive. People don't want to be told the truth. You ever deal with somebody you know they're doing wrong, they know they're doing wrong, and yet, don't you judge me? What would happen if I went to the or to a social club or to a university, and I said, truth is one man, one woman that are not interchangeable, and their design is to marry and to have male and female. And anything outside of that system is wrong. How far would you think I'd get? I would not be confirmed by the Senate. I'd be put in jail in some places. I am a terrorist. And yet, did I speak the truth? And so, truth is offensive. And therefore, it is costly. Truth is costly. It'll cost you something. And the question that Lutzer came up with was, okay, you have a person comes up to you and says, my name is Bert. And it's a girl. You say, okay, there's girls, Roberta, whatever. People take on nicknames, whatever they want. Okay. And you will address me as him and he. Now you got a problem. Do you deny reality? And if you don't deny reality, it will cost you something. And what do we do as Christians? Are we willing to lose our jobs? Are we willing to be considered pariah? So he makes you think about those things. How far are you willing to go? Buy the truth and sell it not. So if you're going to hang on to truth, or are you going to sell it in order to be happy or to keep people happy with you? Well, that's an open-ended question, isn't it? It really is. Okay, we better close. I'm sure we went over time tonight, but I hope that we left you something to think about. Okay, any questions or comments?